Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I've got a few people who've already been registered or logged in for a little while, so thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about how to hire sales reps that hit targets. It's something that's a really interesting topic, particularly we know that a lot of people are interested in it because that's one of our most searched terms on Vervoe's software. So what we'll be covering today, a few different things, which I'm going to start with actually some housekeeping before we jump into it, particularly because we'll have some people still logging in. Pesky time at the beginning of the call where we just stall for a little bit. As housekeeping, just to let you know, to the sidebar of your screen, there's a little option there to chat and also ask questions. The chat screen will be viewable to everyone, so, be nice, but feel free to make any comments. Maybe let us know why you're here today, some things that you might want us to cover, or, anything about your own sales hiring that you want to hone in on. In addition, the question tab there is completely anonymous. So if you want to ask some questions, we've got time at the end for Q&A. So feel free. We'd like to make sure that you leave today with everything you came here for. And that's our goal, is to make sure we've got some really great shares for you and ensuring that your next hire is really going to be someone who hits target nice and quickly. To get us started, my name is Chloe. I'm here on behalf of Vervoe. I'm the salesperson, so I'm not bringing a lot of authority today, but I'm definitely bringing some of my own personal experience. But I have brought the authority with me today, which is Stacie Garland.
Thanks, Chloe. As Chloe mentioned, I'm Stacie, and my background is in psychology, recruitment, and training and change management. So I work with Vervoe's customers to identify what to test on, and then also how to translate that into a skills assessment to identify your best performers quickly. So today I'll be talking about how we can really understand what we want to be testing for in our sales candidates, and then how to build a really robust recruitment process to identify those people quickly. So something, and I want to quickly go first through the common mistakes when hiring sales professionals. And this is something that I see a lot of the time with our customers, because they come to us because there's obviously a problem in their sales process, or they're having people who aren't performing when they get on the roll. And these are the common mistakes that we often see that is happening. So the first mistake that we see is that there is too much focus on a resume. Sales candidates and candidates, or people in general, are generally pretty good at writing about themselves and selling themselves. And especially salespeople, it's their role to sell. So when we put too much focus on a resume, we're really judging people on how well can they sell themselves on a piece of paper. And it actually doesn't have any predictor of performance. And there's also a lot of biases that can creep into this process by just looking at resumes. A common theme that we hear from our customers when they minimize the step or take it out completely is they've actually hired someone that they otherwise would have screened out because they didn't have buzzwords or particular keywords on the resume that they were looking for. There's
Things
also
like experience. Sorry to cut you off there, Stacie.
Yeah.
One of the traps that I see absolutely is when you see on a lot of roles that are advertised, like must have X amount of years experience. And I could see how that could be really tricky too, because as you mentioned, having 6 years of experience on my CV doesn't necessarily mean that I was a high performer for that whole time, or that I dealt with the same things that your business might be dealing with. So that's a really interesting point that you make about the resumes as well.
Yeah, and there's also quite something that we see a lot with salespeople is that sometimes you can have experience and you've actually learned really bad habits throughout that experience. So some people or some companies would actually prefer someone who doesn't have too much experience, so they can train them and mold them into, the salesperson or the employee that they would like, and train them through their own sales process without that previous bad habit of experience. So sometimes we don't even need that experience on the resume. And then if you don't, what are you looking at when you are looking at those resumes? So that's just also something to be mindful of.
Absolutely.
There's also, and this sounds relatively intuitive and quite, straightforward, but writing generic sales adverts is also a very common mistake. What we see a lot of the time is very generic sales adverts being written, but it's actually not very descriptive of the role or doesn't build in any of the KPIs in the position. So sales positions are very broad, whether it's selling a product or service, whether it's managing warm accounts, or whether there's a large cold business development element to the role. So writing a very descriptive sales position will be the first contact that you have with your candidates and ensure that you're actually attracting the right candidates to the role from the outset. There's no way that we can get the best candidates for the role if our adverts, first of all, aren't actually attracting the right people to the position in the first place. So understanding from a very descriptive place of what is this person actually doing, how are they selling, and what does that actually look like on the role. And so one way that we can get this information from the outset of the hiring process is actually to get work samples from our hiring managers to understand what these people are going to be doing on the job. So that's also something that's really important to do from the start of the hiring process, and then build that into the advert.
Amazing. And we're going to be talking through a lot of that today. So I'm really excited that we've already covered a bit of this information, even for myself, looking at it from a sales perspective when I'm applying for roles. I can definitely see where this has played into my own applications and people that I've worked with. So I'm really glad we're going to be covering a lot of this info today. I also just saw a question pop up today about will this session be recorded? So just to assure everyone, because I should have said that in the housekeeping at the beginning, this session will be recorded and shared with you all at the end of the session. So if you want to just focus today and then take some notes later, or share this with anybody else, feel free. Sorry, Stacie, go ahead.
No problem, thanks. The third one is we often place a lot of emphasis on who can actually interview the best. And as I mentioned, when we focus on the resume, salespeople are generally really good at talking about themselves and selling themselves. So we're actually basing our decisions on who we interview or who interviews the best when we actually meet them. Obviously, interviews are an important part of the process, and I like to think of what we go through today as different puzzles or pieces of the puzzle. So every piece has a place, but you can't make one decision, or you can't make a decision on just one of those pieces. So interviews are absolutely important, but we also place too much focus on who can interview the best and sell themselves in the interview. There's also a few other biases that I will go through in the next slide that can creep into this process. And then the last mistake is we actually don't put them to the test. Thanks. We actually don't put them to the test. So salespeople, they can talk the talk, but can they actually walk the walk? A common test for salespeople is often a presentation, which is done at the tail end of the process, which absolutely can have its place, but again, is only one piece of the puzzle. We want to understand whether they can overcome the objections that are common with your buyers. Can they actually map the market of your market? Can they get in front of the right people to do those presentations? Because if they don't have the strategy behind them to actually get there, or actually go out of their way and make those cold calls to actually get in front of those clients, it doesn't matter if they can present. So we want to make sure that they can actually do all of the groundwork and have that strategy behind them to get into the front of the right people, and that is contextualized to your business and to the product or service that you're selling as well. Cool, go to the next slide, thank you. So I mentioned previously of a few of the biases that can creep into traditional recruitment methods, and I won't go through all of these, but I think it is important to highlight a few of them. Most of the people on the call would have heard of confirmation bias and a few of these other biases. So I will go through the ones that are relatively will come out when we place too much importance on resumes and interviews. So one of the ones that we see a lot is the similarity bias. And I'm sure we have all heard of this, but we as humans like people who are similar to ourselves. So if we're focusing on a resume or an interview and we see someone went to the same school as us, or worked at a similar or the same company, or has a very similar background, we're more likely to want to hire them because we like them. And in an interview, people as whenever we meet someone new, we want to find common ground with the person that we're talking to. So often this can lead to a bias because we're finding common ground, we're building that rapport, we start to really like the person. And so we start to base our hiring decisions on whether they are likable or not. And obviously that would come into play as a salesperson, but it actually isn't predictive of performance. So that's the first bias to be aware of. The second is anchoring bias. And so this is when we anchor a certain piece of information onto a candidate and then use that to make our decisions. So, for example, we might have had someone who was a really high performer in the role before, or the predecessor, or currently in the position, and we make our decisions based on that person. So we start to say that person performed really well and I want another one of them. So we try and replicate that person into the new candidates that are coming through. If you're a hiring manager, or if you are a recruiter and you work closely with the hiring manager, I heard this a lot when I worked with my recruitment clients, was find me another Jane Doe, or find me another one of those candidates. And it's basing your decisions on how someone performed in the past and trying to replicate that person, which minimizes the use, or minimizes the diversity and inclusion in the organization.
I love, sorry, I love that you mentioned that as well. I think that, you know, the opposite of bias is diversity and inclusion in my own mind. And I think that when you look at all of the data around different teams and different organizations, diversity plays a huge part in performance and innovation. And it's the same goes for sales. If we have all of the same sales rep, or we have all the same type of person, then everyone's missing the same opportunities, or missing the same skill that might be really critical. So it's really important, even in the sales sphere, to be focused on that.
Absolutely. And I think it's also to keep in mind that all of your buyers are not the same. And so all of your buyers will have diversity, and all of the people that your salespeople are, business developing and going out to meet will be diverse themselves. So if you have a diverse range of people who are going out to meet them, you're more likely to actually engage with them. And, those similarity biases also come into play with your salespeople when they are selling. So if we have a wide range of people who are actually selling on behalf of the organization, that also engages a wider range of people in your buyer.
I love that, and actually also reminds me of one of our customers who started to use a different way of recruiting. So instead of looking for similarities in CVs and, they must have this experience and this type of industry experience, they instead went, well, let's just, give everyone a skill assessment at the top of their hiring funnel. They actually saw a complete change in the diversity of one of their teams. And then that also impacted the metrics on the job. So the customer satisfaction rating that we're dealing with that team was, increasing at the same rate as the diversity. So it's really interesting. Now, there was just a comment in the chat there asking if we could cover maybe just quickly some of those other biases. There's a bit of interest there. So if we could just quickly maybe comment to some of those.
Yep. So the halo or horns effect is when we like one attribute of a candidate or a person, and we start to base all of our other,
Yeah, like they didn't interview well, but they worked at Google.
Yeah, correct.
Really and keep trying to make it work.
Correct. So we're trying to find ways to like this person. Or the horns effect is the opposite. So they might have worked in an organization that you dislike, and so we reduce everything down about them. The confirmation bias is when we have a belief and we are constantly searching for and interpreting information that is confirming that belief and disregarding anything that doesn't. So we might have a candidate that we like, and we previously know that any candidate that comes from Google performs really well. So then we find a candidate from Google and we think that they're a really great candidate, and disregarding any red flags or information that is not in line with that belief. Mm-hmm. The contrast bias is, and this is actually quite common when we are using or going through a lot of resumes at the same time, and it plays out regularly in recruitment because if we're looking at a large number of resumes in a row, one after the other, we tend to compare and contrast people against each other. So we judge whether the person in front of us did well based on whether they were better than the person that came before them or their resume, when really we should only be comparing the skills and attributes each individual has as an individual rather than compared to each other candidate. So those are just a brief outline of those.
I'm so glad you covered them. That was actually really interesting, and I can see how this absolutely plays out so much in sales recruitment. So thank you to the person who asked for that. So what we'll be doing today, that was, I guess, a bit of an introduction. So thank you so much, Stacie. It's really interesting already. So I'm really excited about the rest of the session. Our session today is now going to cover essentially the time period or the workflow of recruiting a salesperson. So we're now going to be starting in building a sales profile to understand the role before we write a position description and advertise it. Then looking at how we will assess, or the best ways to evaluate your sales candidates, and also to build on that at the interview process as well. So this is going to be our little workflow, and let's jump in, Stacie, because we've got another 45 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less if you want to leave some time for questions. So go ahead. I'm really excited.
Thanks. So the first step is to understand or build the sales profile so we can write an accurate job description. So as mentioned at the start, and hiring salespeople yourselves, understand that each sales job is different. You might have an inside sales job. You might have someone who is developing warm relationships, or who is doing email campaigns, or has to attend a lot of meetings. So in order to attract the right candidates and build the right job description, we first must understand the ideal sales profile. And so I've put a bit of a table here, and this is something that you could actually take to your hiring manager, because sometimes getting information from hiring managers is a little bit hard. Something that you could actually take to your hiring manager is a table of the different sales responsibilities, or different skills that they need in this person, so they can actually check which ones this particular role will entail. So this is getting really strong information at the start of the process to be able to build that profile and understand what this person needs to look like and the skills that they need to have, and also what they're going to be doing on the job. So one thing I also will point out at building into this stage is actually including the KPIs. What are they going to be measured on, and understanding what good looks like in this role. So some sales roles might be targeted with the number of calls or meetings that they book or have every week. It might just be on the sales or the deals closed for a month. And actually building these KPIs into the job description will attract the right candidates for the job from the outset.
So I love that too, Stacie, because I think that, we talked just before about bias, and I think that one of the ways to overcome that is, making decision-making data-driven. And so if we have actual factual data on what will the job include and what do you require from your sales hire. So instead of someone saying, just get me another, Trevor from the team, who performed really well last time, or who's performing well in the team now, we instead can go, okay, great, well, what actions, what tasks, what skills are going to be really critical, or what make Trevor a high performer. So we're not just going, oh, the personality is what we like. Instead, we're looking at what they perform well, or what jobs are critical. I think as well, something that I could see working here, Stacie, is looking at, if we're hired for different reasons, and if one of the reasons is, replacing somebody who has left or who didn't work out well, it can be also helpful, I could see, looking at what didn't work out very well last time, or what skills we're lacking, and then we can help to build that into, make sure that that's part of the profile, and make sure that's what we're looking for in the future ones as well.
Absolutely. And I think sorry, just to cut you off.
No, okay.
I think it's also really important to build as much information and detail into the advert as possible, because it will also make your advert stand out. As salespeople applying for roles, they can all look the same and they can all blend into the same advert. If you're actually providing them with detailed information of what is expected of them, of how they'll be measured, of what challenges they're going to face, that's going to be more memorable than a very generic ad that's saying you need to be driven and motivated, or you need to hit your KPIs, because obviously that is a given. But what are the KPIs and what do I need to be hitting is going to make that more attractive, because either it's going to say, oh, actually that's not a job for me, so it's going to save your time and their time. And it would also really attract candidates who are like, yeah, this is the job for me, I really want this. You're actually going to get a high quality candidate by building that into the advert from the outset.
Yeah, I totally agree, particularly from my own bias. Being a sales candidate, when I've looked at roles, it is very important to me to understand what the job looks like. And if it's just saying to me very broad statements, then it gives me an impression that maybe you don't understand much about what you need, or that, it's not a very valued position. And if I don't have that information when I'm applying or when I'm coming into interview, then we're sort of starting off on the wrong foot. And you might get, those candidates who just apply for everything, but you really, if you give them transparency around what you need, there's some tips here on what you should include as well. And for myself, it can be really valuable to understand who is your buying group, what objections they may face. You might not want to go into too much detail there, but there's still certain things that you can expose for your candidates so that they've got full transparency. If we go back to the things that may have not worked out in the past from candidates, we've found through talking to with many of our clients that sometimes the candidates, where there's high turnover, the feedback is often that the candidates will say, when they've left the business, they've said, I didn't know what I was getting into, or I didn't know what the job was about before I started, and actually it's not what I thought it was going to be. So this is a way that you can also overcome that. Give your candidates a lot of insight at the beginning. What sort of skills are they going to need to be able to be successful, and what are they going to be tapping into? And as Stacie mentioned, the metrics and the KPIs that they're going to be measured on, because I've performed better in some jobs than other jobs based on which components of my strengths and my skills that I would be engaging. And if I know what that is at the outset, then I'm going to hit my KPIs and perform much better quicker for you. So it's really great to include those things. What are your additional tips, Stacie, with the PDs?
Yeah, so on the theme of bias, the language that we use in our adverts and position descriptions can actually subtly impact what candidates apply or don't apply to your roles. So research shows that there are many words that are actually associated with masculine or feminine stereotypes, and they can unconsciously influence jobs that we apply for. So there's a few online tools called the Gender Bias Decoder, and this will actually analyze the job ads or any other text. It could be your adverts, it could be your position descriptions, for the language that you are using in your adverts, and whether that's feminine coded, whether that's masculine coded or neutral, or it has a balance of both. So words like driven, hunter, competitive, while it's important that some roles entail those, it's also important to balance those with just as many feminine coded words that might be relationship driven or nurture relationships. And so the language that we're using in our position descriptions can really impact the candidates that are going to apply, and then impact the people that we're actually hiring for the job. So just something to be mindful of, that when you are writing your adverts, there's online tools that you can use that are absolutely free, that you can just see, paste your advert into there and see whether it's masculine coded, feminine coded, or whether it's a bit of both. And we want to be aiming for a balance to attract both types of candidates.
Yeah, I love that. I've definitely come across that, your hunters, your ninjas, your rock stars, and it gives a candidate a lot of insight into the culture of your team as well, I think. So making sure that you're attracting a diverse group of candidates, whether it's gender, whether it's, any other, descriptive, and ensuring that, it's reflective of your team and what you want to contribute to that team. If you're, putting very aggressive language in there, then you're going to get candidates who really appeal to that type of language, and then you're going to get more of that. And just, considering whether that's more of what you want, or whether you want to go with a bit more diversity in there as well. So it's a really interesting one. So building on that, Stacie, talk to us about some of the language that you could use, the way that you could improve your position descriptions.
Yeah, so this is what we mentioned about being more descriptive from the outset, in terms of being able to, attract the right candidate. So a lot of the sales and these examples are actually examples that I've taken from adverts that were on Seek. So a driven and motivated sales professional could be changed to be actually a little bit more descriptive about what you want them to be motivated for. Obviously, sales, you need to be motivated to make more sales, but you also want them to be able to have that learning agility and learn from their mistakes and grow from their experiences. And that's more important to you than someone who's going to come in and just, motivated and not going to actually, reflect on their experience and reflect on any mistakes that they've made. Consistently hit targets. What are those targets? So actually putting in about meetings booked and deals closed will be able to give your candidates more insight into actually what the job will be and what they're going to be measured against. And also consistently develop new leads. How are you developing those leads? Is that through complete cold, that they're going to have to do market mapping to understand and uncover these leads and find out the relevant point of contact? Are they going to be going to networking events or doing email campaigns? And actually putting in more information about where you're going to develop those leads. Some salespeople absolutely hate networking events. So if that's part of the job description, they will say absolutely not for me. Some of them absolutely love it. So actually putting in more information will be able to attract the right people and get the right candidates actually applying for the job.
Yeah, beautiful. I love this too, Stacie. I feel like we're advocating a little bit for salespeople here, and sharing a little bit how they can be very different. And I guess one of those things is actually a really good segue. when candidates are applying for roles in sales, there's often a lot of testing that can be engaged in there to assess if we're getting the right candidate. Now, we've sort of tried to map here a little bit of what are commonly used, things like cognitive and aptitude or psychometric testing, personality assessments, very popular in sales recruitment, use of video interview, and also skill testing. Can you talk us through a little bit what makes them different and where you find that there's stronger or where the opportunity is for some of these testing methods?
Yeah, sure. I'll try not to spend too much time on this because I could talk about this all day.
Me too.
Cognitive and aptitude testing actually has a bit of research to support its efficacy in predicting performance. However, it doesn't actually account for learned experience on the job or have any. It's often misused because we're not actually tying what we're looking for in the cognitive or aptitude test to a performance-related metric. So cognitive and aptitude testing is something that we're generally more familiar with because it's a general test of intelligence. So we feel more comfortable understanding those results. A lot of the time they're also misused because it's a way to screen people out. So we're always going to be looking for the most intelligent candidate or someone who scores higher on these tests. But sometimes it also doesn't translate to how they're actually going to solve problems or apply that knowledge in the context of the role. How someone, if someone can actually identify the next pattern in a series, might not actually show you how they're going to solve problems on the job because they might have understood that or developed experience from or developed understanding and knowledge from learned experience, and it doesn't test for that in those kind of tests. The next one is personality assessment, and personality assessment absolutely has its place, but it is also often widely misused in recruitment. And I might have a few people getting off at the moment because they're using personality tests. Especially when hiring salespeople, we can default to thinking that we need candidates who are extroverted, or we have a high performer who has a particular personality trait or set of personality traits. So we want to replicate that. And that can lead to biases that can lead to trying to have a whole sales team that looks exactly the same on paper. Where personality tests are really important is to inform development, because that can show us how someone likes to receive and interpret information. It could also tell us how someone's learning style, how they prefer to learn, or how you need to train them when they're actually on the job. Personality also does not predict performance. So you can have a wide range of personality traits and a wide range of different people who will have different skills that will perform really well on the job, but that's not actually tied to a particular personality trait.
Yeah, I think that personality is such an interesting one in sales teams. I think you're right. It seems to be the first thing that everyone probably defaults to. We all have an image in our mind of what salespeople are like, or that it's all about personality. But your team might also be, if we're looking for maybe someone who's a BDR, booking meetings, I mean, personality could be important, but also maybe managing the CRM, documenting things, being conscientious and following up. Maybe that's more important than being extroverted. So I think that there's a lot of risk there in focusing on personality because, as you said, it doesn't predict performance. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned this one. Go ahead. Yeah, video interviewing.
Yeah, and so I put a yellow box in efficient because video interviews often have perception that they are efficient, but what we need to remember is, especially if we're using them at the top of funnel with all of our candidates, we're sending 5 videos to all candidates, we actually have to watch those videos. So not only are we looking at a resume and potentially having interviews, but we're having to watch 5 videos or 10 videos or however many questions for every single candidate, and it's actually only testing it's still just putting an interview online. So it's still placing too much information or too much decision making based on who can answer the questions best or who's most confident in front of the camera. So it's only one part of the sales aspect, and that can also be prone to a lot of biases because we're also just focusing a lot on what they're saying and generally how someone looks in the interview. And skills testing is backed by a lot of empirical research to predict on-the-job performance. So the best way to actually see if someone will be successful in the role is to see them doing the role. So, it's like an online job trial or giving someone work samples and actually getting them to do the work. And that's the best way to see whether someone will face up to the challenges in the job, whether they are, in a sales environment, whether they are best at the email campaigns, or whether they can actually pick up the phone and do a 60-second pitch over the phone. So the best way to actually see that is to get them to do the job. Skills testing also informs development. So if you have candidates who are really strong in one area and not particularly strong in another, that could be an area for development for when they're on the role, to provide more training or support, or informing onboarding process with your hiring managers. It also prepares the candidate really well, as you mentioned earlier, is that a lot of the reason people don't work out in roles, and sales roles particularly, is because the role isn't what they expected. So if you build a really robust skills assessment, it's actually preparing the candidate for what challenges they're going to face in the role, and giving them really good insight into what every day is going to be like when you're in the position, and whether that's something that they are interested in or not. It prepares the candidate for what they're getting themselves into.
I think as well, it's really interesting to look at, there might be some people on the call today who have sort of not misconceptions, but have preconceived ideas about what we would mean by skill as well. And I think that that could be, like, we're not just talking Excel, proficiency here. It's the soft skills that are required on the role, as well as the technical hard skills. So whether it's prospecting, whether it's communicating, overcoming objections, those are all skills, because they're all things that you learn and you can develop. So it's interesting to see how there actually can be a lot of benefit to using that. And I mean, we might be biased. It's got green all across the bottom there, but as Stacie mentioned, there's a lot of research to support the use of skill testing. So let's dive into a little bit, Stacie.
Yeah, cool. So we've put together a few tips of how to build a really robust assessment, and this can be done online for a platform, or it can, you can build this into your own process if you're not wanting to use a platform. So the first tip is to be specific. What I talk to my customer or our customers about is to identify the top 4 skills that are required to perform the role. At this stage, it's really easy to run ahead of yourself and say, well, they need more than 4 skills, which is absolutely true. But what are the 4 non-negotiable skills that they absolutely need to be able to perform this job successfully? And once you have those, and that can be identified through those the work samples that we got from the hiring manager, or the sales profile that we built once we were writing the advert, the 4 skills that they will be using every single day, the 4 skills that will make them successful to be on the job. And then once we're specific, we can start to build questions and build an assessment around their skills to enable you to see whether someone is right fit, wrong fit, and also show the candidates what they're getting themselves into. It's a really important or good idea to also build the KPIs into this as well. So if they're booking meetings, or if they're making phone calls, actually put questions or be specific about the skills that they need to hit those KPIs, and how they're going to get there in order to do that.
There's 2 great reasons for that as well, Stacie. The first one is, don't boil the ocean. It can be very overwhelming to try and find all of the traits that you need. Think about what things can be developed on the job, or what things are critical, as you've said. And the second thing is, if you use the KPIs to inform the way you assess and select your candidates at the beginning, it's a really great way, again, if we're looking at data-driven insights, that's what sales is all about. It helps us to understand, okay, when they're performing on the job, how did we, proving how well we've performed as talent acquisition professionals, how well we hired them, because we've got that data to show, well, actually we assessed them on X, Y, and Z, and they're performing against those on the job. So really helping you to build, almost close that loop as well, and have that constant loop with your hiring managers, where we've got clients who have been able to do that and build in their recruitment process using KPIs and targets on the job. And actually, the hiring managers then you've given me this amazing candidate who's ramped really quickly, hitting targets, contributing to the team, and hitting all the metrics that I wanted. I trust you more now. I'm going to, collaborate with you more now, and actually going to work better together. So it can actually be really great. So a lot of benefits to this tip that you've just shared. Thanks, Stacie. So the second tip, I wanted to just jump in here. Context is really important. I mean, I think that there's probably some people who might have joined today thinking, okay, I'm going to get a profile of what a top performing candidate would be, and I'm going to use all these tips from today and go and hire my top performing candidate. I wish we could give you that. I wish we could give you an exact formula that's going to be like, this is the one. But actually, it's about what's important in your business and what's important, what are they going to be, what are they trying to achieve? As Stacie's mentioned a few times, there's different, I guess, tasks and responsibilities that we have of a salesperson, whether it's account managing or prospecting or closing deals or, being a problem solver. There's different things that we need. And even the skills that Stacie mentioned in the previous slide, like negotiation as an example, that could look different in your business to, a bank would look different to a software company, would look different to a lawn mowing business. What we want to be able to achieve with those candidates is show them what this skill could look like, or expose them to that skill within the context of our business. So again, they know what they're in for, and also you're testing it more accurately. So not just saying, sell me this pen, but actually getting them to talk about, okay, a customer has come back and said that they don't have budget on this. How are you going to overcome that before this financial year? Scenarios that are actually in the context of what they will face on the job. That context is really critical.
Absolutely, and that's a great segue into the third tip, which is actually making it real. So what challenges will they have to overcome in order to hit their targets? Sometimes we don't want to throw challenges at candidates because we think, it might put them off. But actually, it's a really good insight into how they're going to be facing those challenges, how they're going to problem solve and then overcome those challenges. And also, once again, giving them really good insight into what they're going to be facing in the job. Candidates would much rather come into a role understanding everything about it, understanding these are the challenges that I'm going to have to work through, and these are actually challenges that I want more experience on, or I want to refine my skills on. So I'm actually really willing to step up to those challenges. Example here is something that Chloe mentioned, was a prospect you have been working with for 3 months emails you, they've had budget cuts and gone with another supplier. Make it real to your organization. What actually happens with your buyers? What challenges will they actually, what is a common challenge that your current salespeople have to overcome? And it might be even a good idea to get them involved in this process to really understand what challenges they're facing in the role, to make it really real for your candidates, and also real for you to be able to see how they're going to be facing up to those challenges once they get into the job. There might need to be again, this could inform the development, that they might actually need a bit of training or development around this, or they might be a complete gun and be ready to hit the ground running. So it gives you another data point or another piece of the puzzle to understand where they come in when they get into the role, and potentially what training and development needs they have once they're successful in the position. Cool, so I've got a few examples here just to, I guess, highlight or show you what sort of questions, when we talk to customers who are new with skills testing, it can be really easy to just put your interview questions in an online platform or in an email and ask the same questions, or ask very situational based questions. Skills testing is really about making it contextualized to your organization and your in the particular role. So actually changing the way that we ask the questions is really important to elicit the right information that we're getting from the candidates. So I've got a few examples. So whether this is relevant to your organization or role or not, but getting them to provide examples of follow-up techniques to catch a prospect's attention and convert them. This would come from their experience, what has worked in the past, or if they don't have experience, how creative can they be, or what ideas do they have that they could bring to your organization. The next slide is, we mentioned previously that a lot of salespeople have to do presentations or get up standing in front of other people. How can they actually build that presentation? And actually getting them to do that work and getting them to create a presentation from scratch would give you really good insight into how they're going to perform that, if that's a key component of the role, how they're going to perform that in the position. But giving them a bit of background to the question that makes it relevant to the role and contextualized to your organization also helps build in some, I guess, background and content into that question to help them deliver that question or deliver the content accurately.
I'm just going to jump in there as well, Stacie. I think that this particular question and example might have, if I'm on this call, watching in on this webinar this morning, I'm thinking, is that going to be too much for my candidates? Am I asking too much of them? Is it going to put them off? And I think that there's a few things to contextualize this as well. So it's about thinking about how senior is the position. Like obviously, if it's an entry-level sales role, giving them a whole presentation to design at the first point of contact with us, yeah, that's probably inappropriate. So looking at how we set this type of testing up for the candidate. So is it appropriate to the role? Is it appropriate to the stage in the process that we're talking to them? So maybe having something a little bit shorter, a little bit more mobile friendly, or a little bit more basic, and maybe even incorporating motivation and values of the company could be more appropriate for the first step with your candidate, because it's still an opportunity to give them a flavour of your brand and really engage your candidates there as well. And then maybe for your more senior roles or further down along the stage of your recruitment process, something more in-depth, like, design a presentation and do this work for us. If we think about it, some of the other testing we already talked about, even at a cognitive or, an assessment there at the top of funnel, which are often used for screening, sometimes it's an hour and a half investment. So thinking about how we use our candidates' time and how we frame that for them is going to be really important, but also viewing completions of your candidates as not a bad thing. If we have people drop out because they don't want to do a presentation for you, they've opted out and they wouldn't have been a high performer for you on the job. So that's also another important thing to think about when you're either testing or engaging your candidates. If they're not prepared to engage with the content that you need them to, then that's a really great sign that they're actually not very invested in the role either.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'll just add on to that is that self-selecting out isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's actually what we are wanting to achieve sometimes with an assessment. We are wanting to show a candidate that this is the job, this is what you'll be required to do. Sometimes candidates will get through half the way through an assessment and think this really isn't the role for me, or, I'm really not enjoying this assessment, I'm not going to enjoy this job, so I'm not going to go through this with this assessment. And so providing them really good insight and being transparent into what a role entails and self-selecting out is actually the assessment is doing its job in that sense as well.
Because they might not have been able to do some of those tasks. And that's also a really great indicator for you. That's the purpose of the assessment, is try to understand, can you do this job? And if they can't do the job, then it's better to learn at the, before you've hired them than when they're on the job and you've wasted a lot of time and money. So what's the next question?
Yeah, so the next one, video we like to use sparingly through assessments. We do find that if there's more than 3 videos in our assessments, candidate rate actually drops off by about 17%. So just something to be mindful of when you are creating your assessments. For sales roles, it is probably important to include a video because generally they are customer facing. So you want to be able to see how they present themselves. In today's day and age, they might actually have to sell over video or, over a Zoom. So that's actually a key component of the role. So including video questions, this one's actually really engaging or seeing their ideas or creativity around what they've done previously to engage leads, and bringing some new fresh ideas to the organization, and whether that would be relevant to your role or actually showing you how out of the box they think to engage those leads. So just seeing a different way to ask a question, and also including a video response there. The last one is a spreadsheet. So actually getting them to engage with spreadsheets, if this is a component of the role. Sales roles at the moment, it might not be, because we've got CRMs and we've got other technology that can do this for us, but actually seeing them create a graph and then interpreting that graph and then how they're going to use that information to inform their decisions or to inform their strategy for the upcoming year. So it's a really powerful way to be asking or see their strategy around, are they data driven? Are they going to use previous data or use their performance data to drive and impact or influence their future decision making, and how are they going to do that? So it's tapping into a few different skills there, but also seeing how they use and interpret information to then change their approach. And then the next slide, once we have, and as I said, interviews are still a really important part of the process. So I don't want to say that, once you test someone, you absolutely know how they're going to be performing on the role. It's also really important to develop that relationship. And now when you have a skills assessment, or you have all of those other pieces of the puzzle and you know that they can do the job, the interview becomes a really nice place to actually get to know your candidate on a deeper level, get to understand their motivators and build that relationship on a more personal level, but also delve deeper into more, more information about areas that they might not have performed well in. Now you understand that they can do the job, that they have really strong strengths in particular areas or particular skills that you have tested. So now you can really delve in deeper into areas that you might need more information on, or where they might need a little bit more training and development. So the interview becomes this really, you don't need to fact check anymore. You don't need to try and stump them up because they've already proven their worth. They've already proven that they're interested in the role because they've invested in an assessment for you. They've turned up for an interview and they've already shown their interest. So it changes the dynamic of the interview to actually get more valuable information out from the candidate and to develop that relationship.
I love that, because I mean, how many interviews have we all turned up to where we have to just go through all of our CV, and it doesn't always tell you how those skills will apply to the future job. So, making it data driven is going to be much more beneficial to you to understand who you should be speaking to and what to speak to them about. So for those who may be a little bit less familiar with Vervoe, what you're seeing on your screen as well is the results of the way that we use our software and the way that Vervoe tests. So we test for hard and soft skills, replicating jobs as closely as possible, and using that technology to grade your candidates. I had to do my sales pitch, obviously, but it's still being very transparent. This is still something that you can do throughout your process. If it's an in-person type situation. The concept behind it all is just ensuring that you are getting candidates who are going to hit their targets quickly. And that's the whole priority for our salespeople that we're hiring. So you can still build these processes in without technology like Vervoe, although we hope you choose to use Vervoe or at least look into it. It's still going to be, regardless of the software, it's still a data-driven way, a research-backed way to really make sure you've got the best candidates on the job, which is always going to be great. Now, I feel like we've done great timing today, Stacie. I personally have really enjoyed the chat, and I'm learning some stuff in here too, which is always exciting. We've had a couple of questions come through. So if you do have any burning questions that you want to ask before we wrap up the call, please make sure you just type them into the question section now. One of those questions was, I suppose, what we've covered today is really around the hiring process, but occasionally there can be a hiring manager who's hard to get hold of or hard to engage. So have you got any tips for us, Stacie, around how we can engage our hiring managers better, or what we can do around that relationship?
Yeah, so engaging a hiring manager, and especially if there's change coming into the hiring process, hiring managers aren't often aware of the biases or aware of any problems that are actually in the recruitment process. So in order to engage our hiring managers, I speak with a lot of our customers is to actually bring them on that journey with you. So, if there's resistance about providing any change or making any change to the hiring process, or they're not giving you information that you need to write that perfect or that really descriptive advertisement or position description, actually provide them information or data as to why the process is changing, and then bring them on that journey with you. They might have had people who are not working out in the role, or people that just aren't hitting their KPIs. And so if you bring data back to them and say, they're not hitting their KPIs because of X, Y, Z. So this is what we're doing about it. And because of that, I need this information from you. So it's what's in it for them, why you're changing that process and why you need this information from them is actually going to help them in the long run and give them better people and help them get better performers to bring them on that change management process.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah, it does. So what I took from that was, making it data driven. So providing some evidence of, okay, we're hiring our 5th person this year because we've had high turnover. Well, let's look at what's been going wrong consistently. Let's try and overcome that. I think one of the other comments you made there as well is interesting about, at the beginning of the call, we had that little list of things that they could select as tasks or skills that are really critical. So that can be another thing, trying to simplify the process and make it easier. Hiring managers, if they're a sales manager, which is often going to be the case, got a lot on their plate and they're managing a lot of different things, and they're like, just get me someone. But helping them make it simple by just, here's a list of the skills that, let me know what you need. How can I get a high performer for you? What are the KPIs? And as well, having that transparency of what are the KPIs, and then we might be able to, might be able to build something of a PD out of that as well. So those are probably I'd love some more questions. We've got some really cool comments here. Thank you so much, Brian. That's a very lovely compliment. If there's anybody else who's got questions, we'd love to hear them. But as I mentioned earlier in the call, this has been recorded today, so it will be shared with everybody. In addition, to make sure that you've got some assistance in your future recruitment, there'll also be some packs coming out and sent over to you with some more, templates and tips and tricks to help you with your next recruitment drive and your salespeople. So we are so grateful that you've taken the time today and dialed in. I've really enjoyed the chat, Stacie. I always do. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to just release everybody back out into their day. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.